All right, today I want to go over the next steps of once you have your gears out of, or done in Substance, what you're going to do. Now this assignment, remember, is just the production pipeline one. So it's very similar to the gaming one where we did with the bat. The whole point of this one is I want you to see how do we take our items from Maya into Substance, which obviously we've done before. The biggest difference is that we've split them up into those different UV sets so that we don't have everything stacked on top of each other or all in one. Production pipeline. So I set my project. I'm reopening my gears so you can see it. And modeling, UV editor. So you have to ignore the little gears because those are the ones I added after the fact. So just ignore these guys for a minute. There we go. So that's what we left off with last time, just having the gears laid out in individual squares inside the UV editor. Then we brought it into Substance. Substance read each one of those panels as a separate texture, basically, that we can lay out. Now this gives us the ability not to have masks, because we don't need to have masks on each one of these, because each one of those areas is basically a mask in itself. Now let's pretend that we had different items in our scene that we wanted to do this for. Let's say in our gaming environment, we had a lamppost, we had a fire hydrant, we had a bench, we had other stuff that we wanted to all texture. We could have done the same thing here, and it would have brought each one of those items in on a separate layer, and then still using like the color set editor that we used before where we assign colors to the different parts of the lamp. You could also use those within these areas to have one item that you can assign masks to those individual things, okay? So imagine this right now is actually like 5 files that we've opened up. So the difference here, now that we're done with this part of just dropping stuff on here and then exporting it, is I need to export the textures out of here. Before we picked Unreal, right? We went to the Unreal Engine and exported that out, and it exported all of our materials. In this case, we're going to export out Arnold 5 UDIM. Now what that is, our rendering engine that we're using is Arnold. So when we bring this back into Maya, we're going to be rendering through Arnold, which is what engine it uses to render our stuff out, okay? If you had another one, there's V-Ray that's right there. Here's Unity in case you were going to Unity. You could have your own that you've customized. So this is my Sarcona Arnold one. There's one called Redshift that you could export, CryEngine, okay, a whole bunch of different areas you could export your stuff out to. There's also one for Sketchfab. So I think I showed before that torch that I built where you can actually like spin around the torch. When I export it for Sketchfab, it actually uploads my textures right to my model on Sketchfab's site. So that way I don't have to export them and then upload it. It automatically goes there and links to my material, to my object, which is nice. All right, so I'm going to export this out as an Arnold 5. I want to see what kind of materials are coming out of this. So if I go to Configuration and I find Arnold 5, these are the materials that I'm going to get. So for each one of these items, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I have a base color that's coming out, a metalness, a roughness, a normal, a height, and an emissive, okay? So just like we would get under Unreal, we're getting all the different materials. Now the difference here is that for Maya, to go back into that, we're not getting that one that's bunched all together. So we're not getting one material that is the roughness, metallic, and the roughness, metallic, what was the other one? Ambient Occlusion, that's what it was. So we weren't getting one that was all 3 of those, okay? So this is all the maps that we're going to get. So we should get 6 maps per each one of these items, okay? So I'm going to, what's that? Right, we want the UDIM one, okay? The regular Arnold 5 one is if we were just exporting one item, that would be fine. But because we're exporting out all of these 5 here, we need to pick the UDIM, okay? And then what that's going to do is you'll see that it's going to name this the mesh, which is the name of the mesh, so whatever we've called this item here. It'll call it base color, and then it'll call it texture set. And that texture set is the key area. That's what's going to make this work when we get back to Maya. If I switch to regular Arnold, you'll see that that texture set is not at the end, it's like in the middle of it, okay? So I'm going to export as Arnold 5 UDIM. I want all of these to be 4096. Okay, so when you export yours, set them all to 4096. You can do select all and do it, but it doesn't do all of them. You have to do them individually, which is really stupid. I'm not sure why. Whatever. Okay. For me, just for speed's sake, I'm going to export these all out at 2048. Okay. Just for the lecture, for speed, and for rendering purposes, to make things go quicker, I'm going to export these out smaller. You will export them out bigger. I'm going to pick the folder that I want these to go into. So I just click on that folder right here, and then I go and find my 2520 production pipeline, and then I'm putting it in source images. When we did our gaming, we exported it right to that gaming engine folder where the textures were. This one we're putting back into Maya, so we put it inside the Maya source images. We want these to be targas, so I will save these as targas. So I changed where I want this to go. I set this to be a targa. I made sure this is on Arnold 5 UDIM. All of these are checked. If you wanted just one specific one, you could uncheck one if you only wanted one of them to come out. And then I'm going to export. And now what this is going to do is it's going to go to each one of those things just like it did before for our Unreal, and it's going to export out all of those textures for all of those different shader maps. So now I can come back into Maya and then apply all of those shaders. Okay? Now, if this was Unreal and we had all these different materials, all these different things, we would basically have one material for each gear. That's very time consuming considering you might have an entire character or a robot or something. You might have 30 different pieces, and that's a lot of work for you to have to go through and make 30 different materials and update 30 different files. We want to find a quicker way to do that. So, I'm going to grab all these pieces, and under my hotbox, I'm just holding on the space bar, I'm going to go to Lighting and Shading and assign a new material. So this will bring up all the different materials that are inside Maya. When we were inside Cinema last semester, basically we double-clicked or went to New Material and we created one material. Okay? If we were using a different rendering engine, we would choose a different material based on which rendering engine we're using. Maya is, in some ways, it's kind of like weird because they still haven't deleted all the stuff that's really outdated, no longer needed. They still keep it around. But then we have the stuff that we are actually going to use. So under this Maya surface area, these are things that you're pretty much never, ever, ever going to use. Rarely do you use any of these things. Okay? Under the Arnold shader, because we're using Arnold as a renderer, it has an AI standard surface. This is the material that we're going to use for everything that we build inside of Arnold or in Maya. Okay? So if I click on that, that will create a material for my items. Now, just like the one in Cinema, this one can house all the properties that we would need. So things like reflection, specularity, transparency, subsurface, painted metallic flakiness, all of that stuff is housed under this one material. Pretending we didn't do any outside material stuff, under the preset area, here's all the different presets that you could actually use for this AI standard surface. So it's simply a matter of just going here and saying replace, and it would replace it with those features. Now with this, because we have these items here, I want to bring in those files and connect them. So the way that the material is laid out inside Maya is first I have to give this a name. I don't have to, but I definitely should. So I'm going to call this gear material. And then each one of these little folders is a separate area controlling specific things about it. Yes, sir? How do you figure that out? I just assigned, I went to Lighting and Shading, assign a new material, and then I picked the AI standard surface from Arnold. So base is basically just the base, the color. Like what color is this item? Specularity is the reflection, transmission is the transparency, subsurface is more of like skin tones. Coat is the shininess, like if it was a car painted, okay, and then the rest you will eventually get into. So for something like this, I have maps that I need to connect. So let me go find my maps so we can see what I'm dealing with. 2520, gaming, production pipeline, source images. here's all the materials that just came in from Arnold, or from Substance. So for just the first one, that should be it. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different materials that are coming out. There was no emissive material. That's why I didn't emit or send out an emissive one. Okay? So all 5 of these have to be connected to this gear material in order for this to work. So I'm going to show you 2 ways to do it, and then you can just decide when you get there which one you want to use. So I have to connect them to this color. So if I'm giving this a color, I could just obviously give it a flat color. It's red or blue or whatever. But I want to actually drop in that material. So I'm going to click on this map. So Cinema had a little thing. You click on the arrow or you click on the box and it lets you bring it in. Maya, you have to specify. So I click on the little box here. And then I choose from this list, File. Okay? And then it takes a minute. There it goes. And then I click on the folder, and then I bring it in. So I'm going to grab just the gears, 01, base color. Okay? Now I can see that base color on here. Now you'll notice that that same color is on each one of these. If I go back to my Substance, you'll see that actually all of mine are different colors. Okay? So I need to tell Maya, hey, I don't have the same color on all these. I have different files for each one of them. So under this UV tiling mode, I need to switch this to Mari. See UDIM? That's the one, the Arnold one we chose. So I click UDIM. And then I say Generate Preview. And what this does is it goes through these files and it uses this number at the end. So this is 1001, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It's using that end number to assign it to each one of those areas. So 1 through 5 gets that material because it's labeled correctly. And if I label it or lay it out like this and then I go look at Substance, you'll see that those are the correct colors for that. Okay? Now for each one of the items I bring in, I have to do the exact same thing. To get back to that main window of the material, I can do a couple things. One, I can hit this back button. That will take me back to that other window. Or I can simply click on the item and then find that gear material and then look for it here. So we did the color. I'm going to do the metalness. So I click on the little map for metalness. I go to File. And then I find the metalness image. So one of these is called metalness, which is right there. I hit Open. Now something to pay attention to, let me hit the back button for a second, and I'm going to right click and break the connection. If you ever make a mistake, you right click on the word and break the connection. So this metalness, you'll notice, is not a color slider. Up here where we had the color, it was a slider where you could pick a color. I could pick red, green, blue, whatever. This one basically is a 0 to 1 number. That's what it wants. If I click on the map and I connect that metalness to it, it's basically going to be bringing in a 1-digit number, but I have to tell Maya to just bring in a 1-digit number because it doesn't know what to do with this information. So I'm going to scroll down to color balance and just say alpha is luminance. Okay, so anything that is a 0 to 1 slider, I need to make sure alpha is luminance is clicked, otherwise it won't read anything and it'll basically read the same value across the entire thing. Then I come up here to UV tiling mode, I do Mari, and then I say Generate. And what Generate does is it actually goes through and applies it to each one of those. Now you may get some weirdness happening. You'll see like this item turned completely black. This one is still the blue color. Just ignore it. Just move on with the next one. So I go back again. And the nice thing about the way we exported it is that for the most part, all of these are labeled the correct way. So this is roughness, this is normal. We don't actually use the height map, but we use the other ones. So under specular, there's a roughness. So I'm going to connect the roughness to that one. So I find the roughness number 1, I hit Open. This is again a slider from 0 to 1. So I go down to alpha is luminance. I switch my UV tiling mode to Mari, and then I say Generate. And then it thinks. when this highlight goes away, then it should stop thinking. Sometimes it's stubborn, and I have to like click off and then click back on the arrow and then hit it again. It's generating it. I just don't know why it's not working. All right. So now the last one I need to do is the normal map, which is right here. Okay. Now normal on Maya, they don't call normal, they call it a bump map. Okay. So under the geometry tab, there's a bump mapping. I need to click that, click the file, and then switch this to the tangent space normal. Click this arrow, and then load in my tangent space normal right there. Now, Arnold will do something strange here, and it's one of those things where sometimes it'll do it, sometimes it won't do it. If I change this to Mari, and then I say generate preview, and I get this blackness that you just saw a second ago there, I have to switch the color space to raw, and then say generate preview. Okay? So if you get some unexpected things, it just turns black in some areas, change this to raw, and then you'll be good. I don't know why it does it. It's just stupid. Cool. So that's all we actually have to do for linking those up. So I've connected the metalness, I've connected the color, I've connected the roughness, and I've connected the bump map. So now I want to see what this looks like when it renders. Unfortunately, there's no hotkey for rendering like Cinema does. We have to go into the Arnold area and say render. And what this is going to do is it's going to render, or it's going to first convert all of our textures. There it goes. And then it's going to render this out. Now, we won't be able to see anything in here because there's no lights. So I need to create some sort of lighting system for my scene. So under Arnold, this is where you're going to create all of your lights. Okay? And the lighting is pretty much what we would do inside Cinema as well. So the first thing I like to typically do is create a sky dome. The sky dome is basically just this like floating sphere. So oops, now I can go back to Arnold and say render. And now I can actually see the gears. And Arnold has a little play button right here. If I click that on, then any changes I make out here will automatically update inside this window. So if I click on my background and hit Control-A to open the attribute editor, then I can adjust things like the color. So maybe I want my gear or my light background color to be, let's say, blue. You'll see how it just updates like right away. Okay, so typically you'd want to have this kind of set up on. I'm going to give it, just for now, just a whiter color, like that. And then I'm going to take my intensity down to 0.25. Once I have a basic light in my scene so I can see my stuff, then I'm going to go to the Arnold Lights, and I'm going to add a area light right there. And the area light I can just move around and scale it up. And you're not seeing a whole lot of change. Like there's not a whole lot of difference in this yet. Every area light for Arnold is super weak, and we have to crank up the intensity a lot in order for it to be even seen. So I hit Control-A so I can see the intensity slider, and then you go crazy with this like 2,000. There you go. Now I can see it coming into the scene. If that was too much, like let's say I typed in 20,000, then obviously we would go further down. So let's say 1,000. That looks like it's sufficient. And you'll see, even as I zoom in and spin around, that my render view is updating as well. Now, I'm going to go back to Substance for a second, because this is going to be an issue that you're always going to have, is we're trying to get this to look as close to what we had in Substance inside Maya. And you'll notice, like, my blue one here is pretty matte. There's not a whole lot of reflection, like shininess on it. When I'm inside Maya, and I'm looking at that blue one, I should make sure that I have that same kind of look to it. All right, well, it looks bumpy, that's for sure, and it looks pretty matte, so that's good. So let's check out the red one and see. All right, the red one is pretty glossy. My red one is pretty glossy too. All right, the little green one next to that, let's see what that one looks like. Yep, that one looks pretty good too. Okay? If anything doesn't look at least similar, something went wrong, right? So if I had, just so you can see, this blue one is pretty matte compared to all the other ones. If it came out super reflective, like let's say it comes out like that, and oops, like that, okay? So now my blue one is very reflective. It's way too much reflective for what I just had, right? So then I'd want to go back in and figure out what happened. Sometimes it's the material, sometimes it's the texture. For reasons we don't need to get into, sometimes it literally is just remaking this material, just like reassigning an Arnold shader to it and then reconnecting all the stuff. Arnold can be a bit stupid like that sometimes. Just like every software, apparently. Cool. All right, so now here's another way that you can connect them. And this way is a little bit more familiar because of this is how we did stuff in Unreal. This little blue circle is our Hypershade window. And this is basically where you can adjust all your materials. So very much like we were playing with in Unreal, this is where we can adjust things. So if I click on the gear material here and click the double arrow, we can see all the stuff connected. Okay? So just like we were doing in Unreal, where we were dragging lines and connecting different things, this is how this one works. So if I want to bring in a new file, I just go over here to File, and then I can just connect my file here. So I disconnected my roughness, so I'll find roughness again. And then I'm just going to drag my out alpha to roughness. This one is specular roughness. There we go. And then if I go to my file, I do the same thing I did outside of this. I switch this to UDIM. I say generate, and then it generates it. Okay. If I want to bring in my metalness, I add, another file. I click the folder. I find my metalness. I drag the out alpha to metalness. I do not see my metalness there, so I'm just going to do this a different way. I'm going to click on my gear material and just middle drag this whole node right on the word metalness. Yep, and it connects it to this orange one, which is just a separate random one. Then I will re-add this and regenerate this once it finds it. There we go. Oops. And I have to make sure that metalness is set to alpha as luminance, and roughness is set to alpha as luminance. There we go. You can see without it, this red one back here is very matte. It's not shiny at all. With that alpha as luminance on, it becomes very glossy, like it is inside of Substance. Okay, so pay attention to those things as you're looking at your renderings. Oops. This is also a render button, but this is Maya's render button. Use the Arnold one because that one's a better one. Cool. Yes, sir. We don't have V-Ray on them, nope. Just V-Ray or Arnold was free, so we're using Arnold. This should be on your computers when you install Maya, so you should have that. Now the last step that I want to do for this, the completion step, is actually to take this into a rendered out image, okay? So a couple more minutes, you'll see how do we take that into a rendered out image. So this is a regular rendered out image, but I want this to look a bit more finished and polished. So I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to create a plane. There we go. I'm going to make it big. I'm going to make sure it's sitting under my gears. Like that. I'm going to delete these little guys because I really don't need them. And now I can start to set up my cameras and stuff. Like, what do I want this shot to look like? So I'm going to get kind of low to the ground because I want to do what's called depth of field on this. I want to have the one item in front in focus, and then the rest of this be out of focus, okay? So that looks like a pretty decent shot right there. I should get plenty of opportunity to create that look to this. That's good. I'm going to go into my render settings, which is this little gear right there. This one is just open the Maya render view. We typically don't use that, so I'm going to close it. This is regular render in Maya. This is IPR render in Maya. Typically, we're not going to use either of these. We will use this one, which is display render settings. So this is all of our render settings. So just like we have in Cinema, you have some render settings that you can adjust. I'm going to give this a name, so I'm just going to delete everything and call it Sarcona Gear 001. Our image format is EXR. And EXR can save a whole bunch of information inside of one file, which is what we're going to start playing with by the end of this assignment. We're rendering out just a single image in this case, so we're going to leave all of these the same. If we wanted to render out a movie, we would change the settings to name.number.extension, just like we would in Cinema. We would choose a camera, just like we would in Cinema. We would choose a file size, just like we would in Cinema. For this, because it's a still, we're going to render it at 3000 by 2400. Okay, so your settings will be 3000 by 2400. Because I'm doing a lecture and it's going to take time, I'm going to cut this down to 1500 by 1201, apparently. That's half of, doesn't make sense, but it's half of 2400, whatever. Under Arnold Render, this is where you would choose your quality settings. So let's look at some of the things that this is going to do. So this is what the rendering is going to look like. Down here on the bottom it says rendering, so it's doing a progressive render. It does like an overall picture, and then it refines it, refines it, refines it until we get to that end image. By the time this thing says when this thing says an actual like time on here, that means it's done rendering, and then that's your final image. So this is taking even longer than I expected. I'm going to lower my size even further to 1000 here. Again, you'll keep yours at 2400 or 3000 by 2400. All right, so this is still thinking, still thinking. I'm going to go into the Arnold renderer and show you what some of these are going to do. So this camera AA, if I pull this down into the negative numbers, and this is still thinking, nope, it's done, there we go. That's what the image is going to look like. Okay, so that's my final image out of Maya, and that looks pretty much like crap. The higher this number is, the more refinement we're going to get. So that's better, but not much. That's better, but still not much. The default is set to 3. And so we'll see what this looks like. It's still refining it. You can see right there. It's still going to come back and refine this. If I want to focus on one area because I don't want to wait for the entire image to render, I can click this. This allows me to just marquee an area, and it'll just update this one spot. So if I'm rendering a huge image, I just want to see what this one spot's going to do, that's going to save me a lot of time. Okay, so this is done. You can see there's still a lot of noise in here. If I take my camera AA up more, it'll clean up that to a point, but then I'm going to have to start playing with some of these other ones. So I may have to increase diffuse. Now you only want to do these one at a time. I don't want to go crazy and just put each one to like 10, because then my image will take forever to render. I take my specular up to 3 also. Okay, still not really getting rid of the noise. And I'm realizing that I did not give this item a Arnold material. Whenever you're rendering with a specific renderer like Arnold, you want to make sure that each of the items have the same kind of material. So it's a standard surface for those, a standard surface for this one. And I will call this one ground material. And then I'm just going to give this some roughness and give this a basic color, so like a darkish blue. And go more in the blue realm here. There we go. It's too purple. There we go. All right, so now that's still rendering, and that's definitely a bit cleaner, okay, than it was a second ago. I also have to keep in mind that my zoom right now is in. I'm like zoomed into the picture, so it's going to look grainy if I zoom in like a lot. So I want to be basically like this. That looks pretty clean right there. Okay, so I like the way that looks. I'm happy with the results. I can drag this box somewhere else if I want to see what something else looks like. And I can say, yep, that's good, so I'm going to turn that off. And then it'll do the whole thing. Okay, so this gives me my basic setup as far as what the settings are. So if you have any noise at all and you have to look close, you have to look in the shadows, you have to look in the item, look all around, then you can start to pull some of these up. Specular is your reflections, diffuse is your color, and your camera AA is just your overall shading. So you want to soften those. What else? Nothing really in here that we need to play with. I'm going to go to the AOV one. And in this is where we're going to be doing the depth of field. So I'm going to click on the Z and click this over. So in the AOVs, this is going to render out what's called a Z depth pass. Now we can't see anything happen here. This image is going to look exactly the same. If I switch this to from beauty to Z, this is going to be the depth. The purpose of this is that it actually will record a black and white image of what items are close to the camera and what items are far away from the camera. We can't see it right now because it's just whited out, but if I use this, then we get that. Okay, so that's what this should look like. When I crank this down, I should be able to see basically my images growing. That's perfect. That's exactly what that should look like. So I'm going to click that, and that resets it. Then I'm going to add a custom one. So I hit Add Custom. And I'm going to call it Ambient Occlusion, AMB-OCC. Or you can type in AO, or you can call it something relating to that. Now when I do the AO, it doesn't actually create anything. I go to this, there's nothing there. It doesn't know what this is, so I have to tell it. So I go to the arrow, I say Select, and then I hit Control A. Click back here and then hit Control A. There it is. And under shader right here, I'm going to click on the little mapper and then find Ambient Occlusion. So I just type in Ambient, go to Arnold, Ambient Occlusion. Now when I do that, now I'm going to get an Ambient Occlusion pass, which will allow me to create some really nice dark areas where this thing is touching the ground. So if I see it before, you'll see that in some areas it looks a little bit light, but when I add this Ambient Occlusion pass in there, this will help kind of sharpen up some of those areas. So it actually feels like these items are like right on top of each other. Okay? So that's all I did. I added the Z, which was over here to the right. I created a custom one and then connected that to the Ambient Occlusion. If my Ambient Occlusion, which is right there, doesn't look like this one does, that's typically what you want them to look like, I can adjust things like the far clipping. Oops, that's too much. All right, not a whole lot seeing there. Let me take the near clipping up. Oops, there we go, too much. I can also take the fall off up. So I get something more like that. And I actually like that better than in the other one, which I think was at 0. Yeah, so I like that being up at, let's say, 10, 6. 6 is good. I can also adjust the spread. So this is how far it's going. And then I can also adjust the samples. Anytime we see samples, that's basically quality. If our ambient occlusion is grainy, we increase the samples. That helps smooth it out. Cool. Now the last thing I need to do is I'm going to go back to this arrow, go back to Select AOV node. And then under the default Arnold driver, I'm going to say Merge AOVs. What this is going to do is instead of us rendering out 3 separate files, because it would render out one for the color, one for the depth, and one for the ambient occlusion, it's going to put all of those into one file. And that's going to save us a lot of time, especially if we did like a movie or something, or an animation. Cool. So once this gets done rendering, I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to save this as a Multi-Layer Exr. So I'd wait for this thing to get finished with its time, and then I would go to File, Save Multi-Layer Exr, and then I would give it a name. So this is going to go into my images, Sarcona Gear B4 Nuke. Okay, so this is thinking still, thinking still. think he's done. All right, while he's thinking, I'm going to open up Nuke. Okay, so this will be another little fun software we get to play with. The code to install this on your home computer is on your first day handout. So if you want to install this at home, you download the trial, you run the installer. When you get to the point that says activate use license server, you'll type in the code that's on your first day handout. And then that will let you use Nuke on your home computer. Okay? You'll get like 10 different versions of Nuke when you install it. You want to use Nuke X. For anything major that you're going to be showing off to the world, you want it to pipe through something else. We never want to go, here's my item that I rendered out and now it's on my web page. We want to go through Photoshop, we want to go through Nuke, we want to go through After Effects or something, okay? For most professional 3D things, Nuke is where you're going to end up with that, and you'll see why, okay? So the interface is going to be confusing. Just let it be confusing and just deal with it. Here is what we see. This is the end result. This is our properties. And then this is where a lot of our work is going to happen, is down here in the node graph. So I need to bring in an image. So I'll show you a couple ways. One way is I find my image inside of my browser. There it is. And I just drag this into Nuke's node graph. That's one way to bring it in. The other way is I make sure my mouse is down here and I just hit R. And then I go and find my image. Production pipeline, images, and then that. Nuke does not need double clicking. So if you're used to double clicking to go into a folder, don't do that. So what I mean by that is I'm back here. I would not double click on Production Pipeline. I single click and Nuke gets me into that folder. You'll probably do it and you'll just figure it out. All right, so here's my image. So I just click and drag, move stuff around. That's how I get things arranged. If I want to see what this looks like, I click on this and hit 1, the number 1. Now that image is up here, okay? Now this allows me, and this is one of the cool things about Nuke, that EXR saves the color, the Z-depth, and the ambient occlusion in one file. I can see those by going up to this area and looking at the ambient occlusion, there it is, and then looking at the Z-depth. Okay? Now you can't see the Z-depth from here, but if I again drag this slider to the left, then you can see that Z-depth happening. Okay? Now what's cool about an EXR, a regular 8-bit image, something we would use like Photoshop or Illustrator or whatever, it only holds about 16 million different colors. Okay? And the way it works is that your red channel basically saves 256 different colors of red, 256 green, and 256 blue. That's where you get your red, green, blue. That's where you get 8-bit and all that stuff. Right. The EXR we saved, if you look at the red, green, blue, it's kind of hard to see on the screen, but they're right here. If you look at those numbers there, those are going into the 0.24530. Okay, so that's 5 decimal points that it's going, plus a whole number out there is 6, plus way back there, which is actually going into that far. So a 32-bit image can actually save billions of bits of data inside there. And what that means for us is that our images are more accurate. When you get into taking a rendering and you want edges to be blurry and the rest of the item to be crystal clear, you need to have all that information there. Okay? So with the 32-bit EXR, we have that. The file is going to be bigger. This is a 9 megabyte file just for the one image. So imagine a sequence, you'd have basically 100 megabytes at least, or 200 megabytes or a gig. All right, I'm going to switch this back to RGBA. The A is for alpha. There really isn't an alpha in this case. It's all just one color. All right, so now what do we do with this? So the first thing I'm going to do is we have a single image that has all these things baked into it. I need to pull out the ambient occlusion. So I'm going to click on this, tap the tab key, and type in shuffle, and then hit enter. Shuffle is a node that allows me to extract something from it. So if I go to my shuffle here and I choose ambient occlusion, it will pull the ambient occlusion out of there. Okay? Now this is the power of Nuke because we have this item which is our color, this item which is our ambient occlusion. Now I want to put them back together again. Okay? So I'm going to click on the shuffle and hit M for merge, or you can type in tab and then type in the word merge, And then the way that everything works, I'm going to tap the space bar so you can see this bigger, is all of the stuff is arrows. So think of it just like you would a river. It starts in one point and then it flows downstream into different areas and branches off, and somewhere it's going to come back together. Okay, that's the whole idea with this kind of thing. So here's our original image. It branches off and we have an ambient occlusion. And then that ambient occlusion is going to get merged. Now it's going to get merged to itself, and this little B is going to go back to that. Okay? Again, it's going to confuse you. It confuses everyone. It's confused me the first time I was in it. It's nothing new. It's just, it is what it is. And now I'm just using the middle mouse button to move around here, and then the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. All right, so now this is merged. These two items are together. I'm going to change my operation from over to multiply. And what that does is it takes my ambient occlusion and it actually like darkens those areas. If I want to see what it looks like before and after, I can click on that multiply or the merge and just hit D. And if I just keep hitting D back and forth, it'll give me like a before and after of what it looks like. And you can see in some of these spots, like right here, that darkness definitely does improve the look of this. You can really see a lot right there. Okay. Now, if I wanted to adjust what that looks like, at any point, I can grab any one of these other nodes, hit the number 1, and see what that node looks like. So if I go back to the shuffle and hit 1, now I can see what the ambient occlusion looks like. If I want to see the merge, I click on that and hit 1. Want to see the shuffle, hit 1. Now, where this comes in handy is because I want to adjust the coloring on this ambient occlusion. So I can either hit G with the shuffle selected, or hit the tab key and type grade. And this will add basically just like a levels that you would use in Photoshop. Not the same interface, but basically the same thing. So as I pull the black point down, you'll see it got a bit whiter. As I pull it up, you'll see that the blacks get darker. As I pull the white point up, it gets grayer. As I pull the white point down, it gets whiter. So just to go to an extreme, let's say that's what that looks like. I go back to my merge and hit 1, and now this scene is like crazy contrasted. I can still adjust this and tweak this to get it to look like I want it to look. And then still click on the merge and hit D to see the before and after. So I like, here's the original image. That looks a lot better. Cool. Now, I'm going to go after the merge. I'm going to type in tab, or hit tab, and then type in Z to focus. This is how the depth of field is going to play out. In Cinema and Maya and every 3D program, there's a way to render out depth of field right in the program. The issue is that if we want to change it, if we want to animate it, it becomes very difficult and very time-consuming to do. So what we do is we render out this depth pass. The depth pass allows us to animate or move or adjust it after the fact. Okay? So the first thing I do is I pick my depth of field. So my depth channel right here is under depth. Sorry, not depth. It's under Z. I can do either red, green, or blue. Doesn't matter, so I'll just hit red. Then I pick the math that it's going to use, and I just choose direct. Okay? So Z red, math direct. And then all I have to do is grab this focal point and say, what do I want in focus? I want that in focus. And you'll see, as easy as that is, I clicked on this to be in focus. That's in focus. Everything else is blurred out. If I want my back blue one to be in focus, now that one's in focus and everything else is blurred out. So if you want your 3D stuff to look good, these are the steps we have to take. Okay? And it's not going to change from project to project. We're going to add stuff. It'll get more complex the more we want to do to it, but this is going to be the process. We have our materials, we bring them into Maya, we export it out as an image, and we bring it into Nuke. And then we can start to play with it to get it to do different things. So I like the way that looks. Let's say I wanted to adjust it. I want to point out, just so you can see this, as I'm moving this focal point, watch this focus plane right here. As I move the focal point, you can see that number changing. If you don't see the number changing, then something's set up wrong. So that's kind of like a gimme. If I disconnect this arrow and the Z to focus is just sitting here, and I move this around, you'll see that the number is still 0. Okay? This Z to focus has to be connected. Then the little dot will update. And now we can adjust. We have a couple items we can play with. One of them is the depth of the field. To see what this is going to do, I'm going to go to my output and choose focal plane setup. Okay? So what this is doing is right where that dot is, imagine from where I'm at, there's a big radius of a distance from the camera. Okay? That dot is picking up that distance that we've chosen, and everything at that radius is now in focus. As I take the depth of field up, I can start to spread out what is in focus. Okay, so let's say everything 10 feet from me is in focus. Well, now it's everything from 9 feet to 11 feet is in focus. Okay, the more I spread this out, the more it's going to be in focus. If I take this up even higher, like let's say 10, well then everything's in focus. Okay, pretty much that's all you use that for. So I'm just going to set this back to result. And then I can play with how much blur we have. So if I take this size down to 0, you'll see we still have a tiny bit of blur way in the background, but not a whole lot. Same thing with my maximum. I take that down, we've pretty much lost all of our blur. As I crank these settings up, I can really hone in on what I want the blur to look like and what I want my depth of field to look like. So that looks pretty sweet like that. Just so you can see, I'll crank up this setting as well. It's still thinking. This means it's thinking, so I'm just going to wait for it to finish thinking. Or maybe it's not thinking. It's done thinking. It's as blurry as it's going to get, unless I crank this number up even higher to like 500, and then it'll be like crazy blurry. Okay, so 100 is probably good. Again, I can move this dot around and change my focus point. And this is what's cool about it. If I had an animation and I wanted to show that kind of focus changing very easily, I could just animate this dot moving to different spots, and different areas would be in focus. Sweet. So that's where I want that focus to be. Cool. And then I'm going to take this maximum down to like, I don't know, 50. I think it's probably too much where it's at. Or 30. Maybe 10 was a good number. Yeah, 10's a good number. All right, so I'll leave it at 10. All right, so that looks good. Cool. Let me shrink my stuff so we can see what the next step is. All right, so we read our file in. We pulled out the ambient occlusion. We graded it. I merged it back in, and then we did a Z to focus. And then my last step that I'm going to do is to get this out of Nuke. I'm going to do what's called a write node. Okay, so you read something in, do stuff to it, write it out. Doesn't matter if it's an animation or a still, it's the same process. So now I can go to my folder and tell it where I want it to write out. So I'm going to send this to my images, Sarcona, underscore gear, underscore after Nuke. And then you have to put an extension here, so I'm going to call this .tiff, because I want this to be a TIFF image. Everything's good. It automatically picks TIFF from the list, and then I hit render, and then hit OK. Bloop. All right, so now inside my folder, you'll see I have a after Nuke image and a before Nuke image. Now this is what's truly amazing about what I just did here. I'm going to save this. I'm going to hit Control S first. I'm going to put this into the correct folder. 20 production pipeline, images, Sarcona, Nuke, script. They call them scripts, Nuke scripts. Okay, for anything else I ever render out of Maya, as long as I have a ambient occlusion and a depth pass, this script can be reused over and over and over again for any item that I do. All I have to do is change this image, and everything else will daisy chain down. So just so you can see, let's find something else that I've rendered from Nuke or from Maya. So if I go to my model HDR, I go to my images. I have these blocks that I've done. I don't know what's on them. We'll find out. Let me view the blocks just as they are. There they are. So this is an animation. Okay, cool. Let me see what channels are on here. So I have an ambient occlusion. There it is. And I have a depth. There it is. All right, so I have a depth and I have an ambient occlusion. So the same exact things that we just had in the other one, I have in this one. So if I go to the shuffle, you'll see that the shuffle pulled out the ambient occlusion. If I go to the grade, it graded it. Now that's probably too harsh of a grade for this specific file, so I can always just kind of reset these values. That's fine. If I go to my merge and look at it, that's the result of it, and I can still use my D key to see the before and after. It's a bit more apparent in this one of what that ambient occlusion is doing. It looks like everything's kind of floating and glossing. Now it looks like it's nice and sharp. I go to my Z to focus, and we still have this crazy blur. Now, because the blur for the other one was at a certain distance, this one's at a different distance. That's no big deal. I grab my focal point, and I say what I want in focus. And then I can go through and start adjusting my other settings. And maybe I want to look at my focal plane setup here. Oops. This one has to be set to D, to depth. There we go. Now I send it back to the result. And that's way too blurry for the background ones because that's very unlikely. Make this 2. Oops. There we go. All right, so now we have some that are fuzzy, we have some that are crystal clear, and some other ones that are fuzzy. So this node graph will work for any image that we have. So from now on, as long as you save this file, you can use it as a starting point for everything else. Now this is just for future why Nuke is so awesomeness. You can actually grab all of your stuff and group them together and make one node that basically you just connect a file to, and then it would work. Okay? You'd have to add other stuff to get it to work, but you could definitely do that. You can also do like vignette type stuff inside here too. So I'm going to connect this. So just so you can see how I would do a vignette, I'm going to add a constant, which is basically just like a solid, just a flat color. I'm going to merge it in. So the A for this will be on the constant, the B will be on this, and then I will view the merge. Now what I want to do is I want to cut a circle out of this constant. So I'm going to go to the constant, and then you can type tab for roto, or I can just hit the letter O. There we go. Okay. Now I'm just going to draw. Oops, I'm going to make it tinier. I'm just going to draw a tiny circle right here, and then I'm going to pull out these little lines. These are like the little feathering things, which if you've used After Effects before, it has it now, but for a long time it did not have it. There we go. Okay. So now my vignette's actually working backwards. The center is dark and the outside is light. So I'm going to go over here to my roto and just say invert. And now the outside will be dark and the inside will be light. That's what I want. And then what's cool about the rendering that I have here, I'm going to go back to the original one. If I hit A, which is the alpha channel hotkey so I can see the alpha channel, you'll see that there's actually an alpha channel cutout for these, and there's actually just like a little shadow area right here. So I can actually take this whole thing, and I'm going to add a new constant. This will be my B, this will be the A, so I just drop that into here. And my constant is way too big, so let me just double click that and then resize it to 960. There we go. I'm going to go to this constant up there and just give this a color. There you go, so something like that. And you'll see that it actually looks like the shadows for this are laying on top of that ground. Now my vignette doesn't look very good. Let's see and find out why. I think my Bezier here just needs a bit more feathering. There we go, that's better. And then this could probably use maybe a darker color. Like that. that looks much better. All right, so the more complex you get with your stuff, the more things you can add inside of Nuke. You could actually even take your model that you built inside of Maya and bring it into Nuke and do stuff with it inside there too. So there's the shadow laying on top of that, so I can really just replace it with whatever. Sweet. I'm going to go, just so you can see, another one that I... This is my model. This is my HDR comp. And you can have multiple Nuke files open too. So like my old one that I was just working on is still open while I'm working on this. And this is where this can get very complex. You can see all the different stuff that I have happening here. But now let's look at this image, wherever this is, right there. So this one, I've taken this image here and broke it apart and put it onto this thing. And then, why isn't that one copying? See red. Oh, something's missing from there. Would this, that. Oh, I'll just show you the 3D part of this. So this is actually like a 3D world inside of Nuke. This is my camera that I brought in from Maya. And what I can do is basically like add stuff to my scene based off of my camera that I used in Maya and brought it in Nuke and then rendered stuff out and then put it all together. Let me go over to one of my other ones because I have several of these that I've set up for playing around purposes. Come on. There it is. So this is a rendering here. And then with this one, I'm able to take and put a whatever image onto that thing inside of Nuke. So if I go there and there. Now you can see there's SpongeBob like on the side of the cup. Right? So if I had a logo or something that I wanted to actually put on this glass or whatever it is, then I can put that in there inside of Nuke. And then what's neat about this is that it actually has stripped out all the pieces. So everything like the reflections and the color and the refractions and all that stuff have been separated, and then I can put it back together. Okay? We're not there yet with this stuff. We are just over here working on this. Okay? So all you're going to be responsible for is just having this. You're going to take your item, bring it in. I'll replace it so we can see it again. Poor Nuke. You're going to shuffle out the ambient occlusion. You're going to grade it if it needs it. You're going to multiply it back in. And then you'll add your Z to focus. And then adjust where your focal point is. And then how much blur you got on there. Oops. There we go. And then you'll render that out, and then that will be your turn-in. Is you'll have the two movies, or the two images here, your before and your after, that you'll be turning in along with your scene file and stuff. Okay? So take the rest of today, take the rest of next class and work on that. Next week we are not here. When we come back from break, we will work on more this kind of stuff, more production pipeline things where we're building stuff, separating it into separate panels, bringing it into Substance to Paint, bringing it back into Maya, rendering it out. If you save your setups or you do these setups correctly, a lot of this stuff can be redone. Once you have a good lighting setup, once you have a good camera setup, basically it's just dropping stuff into the scene and rendering it out and then sending it over to Nuke. Much, much easier than starting everything from scratch. Cool? Questions yet? No? All right. Yes, sir.